June 15, 2023, Seattle. Ella Anderson disappears without a trace after work. Her sister Grace and boyfriend Jake become key figures in the investigation. The case Secrets Between Sisters will reveal how love and jealousy can turn a family into the epicenter of tragedy. Behind the perfect facade, secrets were hidden, ready to destroy the lives of everyone involved. Ella and Grace Anderson grew up in a middle-class family in the suburbs of Seattle. Their childhood was filled with typical sisterly joys and rivalry. Ella, the older by 3 years, was always more confident and ambitious. She excelled effortlessly in academics and social life, often leaving Grace in her shadow. Grace, quiet and thoughtful, had grown accustomed to her role as the younger sister from an early age. She admired Ella, but at the same time, felt constant pressure to live up to her accomplishments. This created a complex dynamic in their relationship. Love and support mixed with unspoken envy and competition. After high school, Ella enrolled in a prestigious university to study marketing, while Grace chose a local college, majoring in psychology. The difference in their life paths became even more pronounced. In 2020, when Ella was 25 and Grace 22, Jake Thompson entered their lives. Handsome and charismatic, the software engineer quickly caught the attention of both sisters. However, it was Ella who began dating him, marking a turning point in the sisters' relationship. Grace, secretly in love with Jake, had to watch as her sister's relationship with him blossomed. She tried to suppress her feelings, but with each passing day, it became more difficult. Jake seemed to be the perfect partner for Ella, successful, attentive, and sharing her ambitions and drive for success. On the outside, Grace supported her sister's relationship, but deep down, she felt growing resentment and injustice. She started to notice how Jake would occasionally give her special looks, how his hand would linger just a little too long when greeting her. These moments fueled her secret hopes and deepened her guilt toward her sister. Ella, engrossed in her career and her relationship with Jake, appeared oblivious to her sister's inner turmoil. She frequently shared details of her personal life with Grace, unaware of the pain it caused. Grace began to avoid family gatherings more and more, making excuses not to see Ella and Jake together. By early 2023, the tension between the sisters had reached a breaking point. Ella started to notice Grace's distance and tried to restore their closeness, but ran into a wall of silence. Jake, caught between the two sisters, seemed to enjoy the attention from both, skillfully balancing between them. A week before Ella's disappearance, an incident occurred that would later draw the close attention of investigators. Grace accidentally saw Jake walking out of a jewelry store with a small box in his hand. Her heart sank at the thought that he was about to propose to Ella. At that moment, something inside Grace broke, and she made a decision that would change all three of their lives forever. This episode would become key in the investigation into Ella's disappearance, revealing the depth of emotions and the complexity of the relationship between the sisters. It would also cast doubt on Jake's role in the story, forcing investigators to question his true intentions and feelings toward both sisters. June 15, 2023, began as a typical workday for Ella Anderson. She woke up at 6:30 a.m. in her downtown Seattle apartment, which she had been sharing with Jake for the past 6 months. Surveillance cameras in the building's lobby captured Ella leaving home at 7:45 a.m., dressed in a navy blue business suit with a leather shoulder bag. At 8:15 a.m., Ella arrived at the offices of Northwest Innovations, a marketing company where she worked as a senior project manager. Colleagues noted that she seemed slightly distracted, but they attributed it to the stress of an upcoming important presentation. At 11:30 a.m., Ella had a successful meeting with potential clients, after which she sent a message to Jake. "The presentation went great. Can't wait to celebrate tonight." Around 1 p.m., the office's surveillance cameras recorded Ella leaving for lunch. She headed to a nearby cafe, where she met with an unidentified woman. Investigators would later determine that this woman was Sarah Lang, an old friend of Ella's from college. Witnesses in the cafe noted that their conversation seemed tense, and Ella appeared upset. At 2:15 p.m., Ella returned to the office. Her assistant, Jessica Chin, observed that her boss looked pale and agitated. When Jessica asked if everything was okay, Ella waved her off, saying she just had a headache. At 3:30 p.m., Ella sent an email to her supervisor, stating that she wasn't feeling well and would like to leave early. Surveillance cameras showed that Ella left the office building at 3:45 p.m. This was the last confirmed sighting of Ella Anderson. Her car, a silver Audi A4, remained parked in the company lot. At 6:30 p.m., Jake began to worry since Ella hadn't returned home and wasn't responding to calls or messages. He called Grace, hoping her sister knew where Ella was. Grace claimed she hadn't spoken to Ella all day and started to worry as well. At 8:15 p.m., Jake contacted the Seattle Police Department, reporting Ella's disappearance. Initially, the police treated the situation as a standard case of a missing adult, suggesting Ella may have left voluntarily or was delayed with friends. However, by the next morning, with no sign of Ella and her phone still unreachable, the police launched a full-scale investigation. They reviewed surveillance footage from the area around Ella's office and interviewed her colleagues and acquaintances. One detail that caught the investigators' attention was that Grace also called the police at 10:30 p.m. that evening, independently of Jake, to report her sister missing. She seemed extremely distressed and insisted that the search begin immediately. During the initial questioning, Jake mentioned that he and Ella had a minor argument the night before about his late hours at work, but they had made up that morning. He also noted that he had sensed some tension between Ella and Grace recently, but he assumed it was just typical sibling disagreements. Grace, on the other hand, told the police that she had last spoken to Ella on the phone 3 days earlier. She said her sister had seemed worried but refused to discuss the reasons for her concern. By the end of the first day of the investigation, the Seattle police officially declared Ella Anderson missing. Search teams were organized, posters were put up, and information about her disappearance was spread through local media. The mysterious disappearance of Ella Anderson quickly garnered public attention. No one could have anticipated that this would mark the beginning of one of Seattle's most perplexing and shocking cases, revealing dark secrets hidden behind the facade of an ordinary American family. The morning of June 17, 2023, marked the beginning of a full-scale investigation into the disappearance of Ella Anderson. Detective Michael Hawthorne, an experienced investigator from the Homicide Division, took charge of the case. His first step was a thorough questioning of Ella's closest associates. Jake Thompson was summoned to the police station to give his statement. He appeared exhausted and nervous. Detective Hawthorne noted his anxious demeanor. Jake spoke about his relationship with Ella, emphasizing that they were happy together and had plans to marry. However, when asked about the ring he had recently purchased, Jake visibly tensed. I was going to propose to her next week," he said, avoiding direct eye contact with the detective. "We had plans for the future. I don't understand why she would just disappear." Detective Hawthorne then asked about the tension between Ella and Grace. Jake was silent for a moment before replying, "Lately, they hadn't been as close. Ella mentioned that Grace had become distant, but I thought it was just typical sibling stuff." Next to be questioned was Grace Anderson. Unlike Jake, she appeared composed and reserved. Grace confirmed that her relationship with her sister had become strained, but she denied any serious conflict. "We just grew apart," Grace said. "Ella had her job, Jake. She had her own life, and I had mine." When the detective inquired about her relationship with Jake, Grace hesitated for a moment. "We're just friends," she replied. But Hawthorne noticed her nervously fidgeting with the edge of her blouse. The investigation continued with interviews of Ella's colleagues. Jessica Chen, Ella's assistant, provided a critical piece of information. That day, Ella seemed really upset after lunch. She got a phone call that clearly rattled her. Detectives reviewed Ella's phone records and discovered that the last incoming call was from an unknown number. Attempts to trace the number were unsuccessful. It had been registered to a false identity. The next step was to review Ella's financial activity. It was revealed that the day before her disappearance, she had withdrawn a large sum of cash, $10,000, from her bank account. This raised suspicions among investigators, Was Ella planning to run away? Or was she being threatened? Meanwhile, forensic teams meticulously searched Ella and Jake's apartment as well as Ella's office. No obvious signs of a struggle or violence were found in the apartment. However, a drawer in Ella's desk revealed an envelope containing photographs. The pictures showed Grace entering a hotel with a man who looked remarkably like Jake. The date on the photos indicated they were from the previous month. This discovery led Detective Hawthorne to rethink his initial theory. Perhaps Ella's disappearance wasn't a random crime but rather connected to the complex relationships between her sister, and her boyfriend. On the 5th day of the investigation, an unexpected lead surfaced. An anonymous witness reported seeing a woman matching Ella's description getting into a black SUV near her office on the day of her disappearance. The vehicle's description was vague, but it was the first clue suggesting a possible abduction. Detective Hawthorne decided to interrogate Jake and Grace once more, this time separately and more in depth. He sensed that both were hiding something and was determined to uncover the truth. By the end of the week, the investigation had reached a standstill. Despite the abundance of evidence and testimonies, the overall picture of what had happened remained unclear. Detective Hawthorne realized that the key to solving the mystery lay in the complicated relationships between Ella, Grace, and Jake. But to unravel this enigma, he would need to dig deeper into the Anderson sisters' past and uncover the secrets they had been concealing for years. A week after Ella Anderson's disappearance, the focus of the investigation began to shift toward Grace Anderson. Detective Hawthorne, reviewing the collected evidence, found several inconsistencies in the younger sister's statements. During a second round of questioning, Detective Hawthorne decided to take a tougher approach. He started by asking about Grace's whereabouts on the day Ella vanished. "I was home all day, working on an article," Grace replied, but her voice wavered. "Do you have anyone who can confirm that?" Hawthorne asked. Grace shook her head. "I live alone, Detective." Hawthorne placed the photos found in Ella's desk on the table. "What can you tell me about this?" Grace turned pale when she saw the images. This isn't what it looks like," she muttered. "And what is it, Grace? Because it looks to me like you were seeing your sister's boyfriend behind her back," Hawthorne said sharply. Grace covered her face with her hands. "We weren't seeing each other. It was a mistake, a one-time thing. Jake. He came to me after they had a fight. We drank, and it just happened." Hawthorne kept pressing. "Did Ella know about this?" "No. I don't think so. I don't know how she got these photos." Grace looked confused and scared. The detective shifted his tactics. "Grace, did you ever feel jealous of Ella? Of her success? Her relationship with Jake?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. Ella was always the best at school, at work, in relationships. I just wanted to feel special. Just once." "Special enough to get rid of your sister?" Hawthorne asked bluntly. "No, I would never hurt Ella," Grace exclaimed. Hawthorne decided to verify Grace's alibi. An analysis of her phone records showed that she had indeed been at home for most of the day when Ella disappeared. However, around 4 p.m., her phone had been tracked to the area where Ella was last seen. In addition, Grace's financial records revealed that a week before her sister's disappearance, she had withdrawn $5,000 in cash. When the detective asked her about this, Grace claimed the money was for a professional development course, but she couldn't provide any supporting documents. Meanwhile, the police continued their search for Ella. Large-scale operations were conducted in wooded areas around Seattle, and divers combed through nearby bodies of water. However, no trace of Ella was found. During this time, an analysis of Ella's computer uncovered another intriguing detail. In the days leading up to her disappearance, she had been researching information about changing her name and obtaining new identification documents. This led investigators to consider the possibility that Ella had been planning to disappear voluntarily. Jake Thompson, upon learning of the suspicions surrounding Grace, appeared shocked. He maintained his innocence and claimed he knew nothing about the photos or Ella's alleged plans to leave. However, Detective Hawthorne noticed that Jake had become increasingly nervous and withdrawn after the conversation. As the investigation progressed, public opinion began to turn against Grace. Local media picked up on the story of sibling rivalry and a potential love triangle, placing Grace under intense scrutiny from the press, making her life even more difficult. 2 weeks after Ella's disappearance, Detective Hawthorne obtained a warrant to search Grace's home. During a thorough search, a hidden box containing Ella's personal belongings, including her passport and several pieces of jewelry, was discovered. This finding became a turning point in the investigation. Grace was arrested on suspicion of involvement in her sister's disappearance. News of her arrest quickly spread throughout the city, shocking those who knew the Anderson family. However, despite the seemingly damning evidence against Grace, Detective Hawthorne couldn't shake the feeling that many questions remained unanswered in the case. He felt that the key to solving Ella's disappearance lay somewhere deeper, hidden in the past of the Anderson sisters. The arrest of Grace Anderson marked a turning point in the investigation into Ella's disappearance. However, Detective Hawthorne sensed that the key to unlocking the mystery lay deeper in the sisters' past. He decided to dig further into the Anderson family history. Hawthorne began by reviewing old police reports and school records. He discovered an incident from 15 years earlier, when Ella was 13 and Grace 10, that had never been previously mentioned. The police had been called to the Anderson home due to a loud argument between the parents. The report noted that the girls were present during the altercation, but no further details were provided. Detective Hawthorne decided to speak with former classmates of the sisters. Sarah Lang, the same friend Ella had met with on the day she disappeared, shared an interesting story. Ella was always the star of the school, but few people knew what she was going through at home, Sarah said. Once, she confided in me that their father was an alcoholic and often took his anger out on their mother. Ella felt responsible for protecting Grace. This information gave Hawthorne a new perspective on the sisters' relationship. He theorized that Ella had taken on the role of protector, which may have influenced the dynamic between them into adulthood. Hawthorne also paid attention to the sisters' academic records. Ella had always been an outstanding student, while Grace, though intelligent, often lived in her sister's shadow. A school psychologist who had worked with the girls remembered that Grace struggled with low self-esteem and feelings of inadequacy compared to Ella. Hawthorne decided to interview Ella and Grace's parents again, who had divorced several years earlier. Their mother, Linda Anderson, reluctantly spoke about the difficult family dynamics. "I tried to protect the girls, but I couldn't always do enough," she admitted through tears. Ella became like a second mother to Grace. I think that created a complicated bond between them. Love mixed with resentment and a sense of duty. Their father, Robert Anderson, was in a rehabilitation center and was unwilling to discuss the past. However, he did mention that he always felt Grace was more vulnerable and needed extra support. Hawthorne also reviewed the Anderson family's financial records from recent years. He found that Ella had regularly transferred money to Grace's account, especially during times when Grace was unemployed. This reinforced the theory that Ella continued to care for her younger sister even into adulthood. An intriguing detail emerged during an analysis of the sisters' social media accounts. A month before Ella's disappearance, Grace had posted a cryptic message. "Sometimes you have to let go of what you love the most to find yourself." While the post could be interpreted in many ways, in the context of the investigation, it took on a more sinister meaning. Hawthorne also turned his attention to Jake's role in the sisters' lives. It was revealed that before dating Ella, Jake had briefly been involved with Grace. This fact had not been mentioned by either of them during previous interrogations. A former colleague of Ella's, Maria Rodriguez, provided another important observation. Shortly before she disappeared, Ella seemed worried. She mentioned that she had discovered something that could destroy her family, but she didn't go into detail. All these details painted a complex picture of the family, one filled with love, resentment, secrets, and unspoken emotions. Detective Hawthorne realized that the key to solving Ella's disappearance lay somewhere in this web of emotions and past events. Yet despite these revelations, the central question remained unanswered. What really happened to Ella Anderson? Was she the victim of a crime born from jealousy and old wounds? Or had she chosen to disappear and start a new life? Detective Hawthorne felt he was close to the truth, but the most shocking discoveries were still ahead. He had no idea that the next step in the investigation would lead to an unexpected twist that would turn everything upside down. 3 weeks after Ella Anderson's disappearance, the investigation appeared to have hit a dead end. Grace remained in custody, but there wasn't enough evidence to formally charge her. Detective Hawthorne sensed that he was missing something crucial. The breakthrough came with an unexpected anonymous tip. The caller claimed to have seen Ella alive in a small town called Oak Harbor, located on Whidbey Island, about 80 kilometers north of Seattle. Hawthorne immediately headed to Oak Harbor. At a local motel, he discovered that a woman resembling Ella had indeed stayed there under the name Sarah Johnson. She had checked out the day before his arrival, leaving behind a few personal items. Among the belongings, Hawthorne found a notebook filled with cryptic notes and phone numbers. One of the numbers belonged to a private investigator in Seattle, Alex Morgan. When Hawthorne met with Morgan, the investigator reluctantly revealed that Ella had hired him a month before her disappearance. Her request was unusual. She wanted him to follow Grace and Jake. Ella suspected something was going on between them, Morgan explained. But the deeper I dug, the stranger the situation became. Morgan handed Hawthorne a folder containing photos and reports. Among them was a photo of Grace entering a family lawyer's office. The date on the image was 2 weeks before Ella's disappearance. Hawthorne immediately obtained a warrant for the lawyer's records. What he found shocked him. Grace had been consulting about adopting a child. Even more startling, the biological mother listed in the documents was Ella Anderson. The detective returned to interrogate Grace with new questions. Under the pressure of the evidence, Grace finally broke down and revealed a shocking truth. Ella isn't my sister, she confessed through tears. She's my mother. The story Grace told was unbelievable. It turned out that Ella had given birth to her at the age of 15. To avoid scandal, Ella's parents decided to pass the baby off as their own, and Ella was introduced as Grace's older sister. I found out the truth by accident when I discovered old documents, Grace continued. I was in shock and didn't know how to handle it. That's why I consulted with a lawyer to find out about my rights. Grace admitted that a confrontation with Ella occurred on the day of her disappearance. I called her and demanded an explanation. We agreed to meet after her work. The conversation was hard. Ella was crying, begging for forgiveness. She said she always wanted to tell me the truth but was afraid of losing me. According to Grace, after the conversation, Ella left, saying she needed time to think. I thought she would come back after a few days. I didn't know she was planning to disappear. This revelation completely changed the course of the investigation. Hawthorne now understood Ella's motive for fleeing. Shame and the fear of losing the daughter she had always pretended was her sister. But there were still unanswered questions. Why had Ella withdrawn a large sum of money before disappearing? Who had helped her stay hidden? And most importantly, where was she now? Detective Hawthorne realized that he was close to solving the case. He sensed that the next step would lead him to Ella and uncover the final secrets of this complicated family drama. The revelation of the true relationship between Ella and Grace Anderson completely shifted the course of the investigation. Armed with this new information, Detective Hawthorne refocused his efforts on locating Ella, now not as a potential victim of a crime, but as a woman attempting to escape her past. An analysis of the surveillance footage from Oak Harbor confirmed that Ella had left town in a rental car. Hawthorne tracked the vehicle to a small coastal town in Oregon. It was there, in a modest cottage overlooking the ocean, that Detective Hawthorne finally found Ella Anderson. She made no attempt to flee or resist when Hawthorne knocked on her door. I knew you would find me eventually, Ella said as she invited the detective inside. During a long conversation, Ella revealed the full story that led to her disappearance. When Grace found out the truth, my world collapsed, Ella confessed. I had lived my entire life with this secret, trying to be the perfect sister to make up for not being able to be her mother. Ella explained that after the confrontation with Grace, she panicked. I was terrified that I would lose her forever, that she would hate me for the lie. I didn't know how to handle it, so I decided to disappear, to give everyone time to process. It turned out the money Ella had withdrawn was meant for Grace. I left it in a safety deposit box in her name. It was savings I had put aside for her over the years. The situation with Jake was also clarified. When I found out about his connection with Grace, I was horrified, not because of jealousy, but out of fear that it would expose our secret. I tried to end things with him but couldn't find the strength. Hawthorne listened carefully, realizing that this was a tragedy where there were no true villains, only people trapped in a web of lies and unspoken truths. Ella agreed to return to Seattle to provide an official statement. Her return shocked everyone involved in the drama. Grace was released from custody. The reunion between the mother and daughter, who had spent their entire lives believing they were sisters, was emotional and tense. They now faced a long journey toward rebuilding their relationship and coming to terms with their new reality. Jake, upon learning the full truth, was stunned. He admitted to having had a brief affair with Grace but had no idea about the real nature of the sisters' relationship. His relationships with both women were irreparably damaged by the revelations. Ella's parents, now revealed as Grace's grandparents, were forced to publicly acknowledge their role in concealing the truth all these years. Their decision, made long ago to protect the family's reputation, had resulted in years of deception and emotional turmoil. The case of Ella Anderson was closed without any charges being filed. Reflecting on the investigation, Detective Hawthorne acknowledged that this was one of the most emotionally complex cases of his career. "Sometimes, in our line of work, there are no clear criminals," he said during the final briefing. "There are only people trying to cope with the consequences of their decisions and mistakes." The Anderson family's story became a topic of widespread discussion, raising questions about the nature of family relationships, the destructive power of secrets, and the importance of honest communication between loved ones. Ella, Grace, and the rest of the family began the long process of healing and reevaluating their relationships. They now had to learn to live with the new reality, overcoming years of mistrust and hidden resentment. This case served as a poignant reminder of how secrets and lies can unravel even the strongest family bonds, and how, no matter how painful, the truth is often the only path to healing and reconciliation. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories that are coming out every day.